In the world of Vancouver's underground financial networks, invisibility was not a weakness. It was the most carefully cultivated armor a woman like Beatrix Howe had ever learned to wear. She was 31 years old, 5'4", 212 pounds, and she could rebuild a collapsed shell company's paper trail in under 4 hours. She had done it, twice. Once on a Tuesday night with a gas station coffee and a cracked laptop trackpad, and once on the morning of her mother's funeral because Gareth Sullywell had called at 7 a.m. and said the words, "We have a situation," in that particular flat tone that meant the situation was in fact a catastrophe. She had gone in. She had fixed it. She had been back at the funeral home by noon. Nobody sent flowers. That was the thing about being indispensable in a room that had decided, long before you walked into it, that you were decorative furniture at best and background noise at worst. Beatrix had a mind that could hold 12 regulatory frameworks simultaneously and spot a discrepancy in a 100-page ledger the way other people spotted a typo. She had been the senior financial analyst at Sullywell Capital for 4 years. She wore the same 3 blazers on rotation, kept her dark hair pinned back because it was practical, and ate lunch at her desk because the kitchen had a particular social ecosystem she had never been invited into and had long since stopped trying to enter. The men in the glass-walled offices upstairs knew her name when they needed something. The rest of the time, she was simply the woman at the corner desk, the one who always got it done. Gareth Sullywell himself, 53, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore a watch that cost more than Beatrix's annual rent, had told her once, in what she suspected he believed was a compliment, that she was the most efficient person in the building. He had said it the same way someone might compliment a dishwasher. She had smiled and returned to her spreadsheet. What Gareth Sullywell did not know, what nobody in that building knew, was that for the past 18 months, Beatrix had been reading, not the files she was assigned, the ones she was never meant to touch. She had not gone looking for them. That was the truth. She had been cross-referencing a foreign transfer in Q3 when the account number had snagged something in her memory, a number she had seen buried in a footnote of a subsidiary report. 6 weeks earlier, she had pulled the subsidiary report. The footnote had led to another account. That account had led to a name. The name had led to 4 other names. And somewhere between the 4th name and the morning light coming through the east-facing windows, Beatrix Howe had understood, with the particular cold clarity of a woman who had spent her career seeing exactly what other people chose not to see, that Sullywell Capital was not a legitimate investment firm with some aggressive offshore strategy. It was a laundry service, a very expensive, very elegant, very well-hidden laundry service. And the man whose money moved through it, always one corporation removed, always behind 3 layers of numbered accounts in jurisdictions that did not ask questions, was a man named Corvin Ashby. She had looked him up. Of course she had. Corvin Ashby, 42. Born in Halifax, raised in Toronto, educated in London. Publicly, he was the founder of a private logistics firm and a silent partner in 3 legitimate hospitality groups. His name appeared in the National Post once, in a business profile that described him as a rare breed of Canadian entrepreneur, intensely private, deeply effective. There was one photograph. He was standing in front of a building in a grey coat, slightly turned from the camera, like a man who had spent his entire life learning to be half present in any given frame. He had a jaw that looked like it had been designed to deliver bad news calmly. Beatrix had looked at that photograph for longer than she should have, then closed the browser, reopened her spreadsheet, and done the one thing her instincts had been screaming at her not to do for 6 weeks. She had documented everything, not because she intended to do anything with it. She told herself that repeatedly over the following months. She documented it because that was what her brain did with information. It organized, categorized, constructed a complete picture. The file existed on an encrypted drive that lived in her desk drawer, and she thought about it approximately every 4 hours, and she had not once picked up a phone to call anyone because she was not naive enough to believe that calling anyone would end in anything other than disaster. She had simply kept coming to work, kept fixing the disasters, kept eating lunch at her desk, and then on a Wednesday in late October, Corvin Ashby walked into Sulawell Capital. He did not announce himself. He did not need to. Beatrix heard the shift in the office before she saw the cause of it. The way conversations dropped half a register, the way Gareth's assistant crossed the floor at almost a run, and then she looked up and there he was, at the far end of the open-plan office, in a charcoal coat, speaking to Gareth Sulliwell in a low voice with the relaxed precision of a man who had never once in his life needed to raise it to be heard. Beatrix looked back at her screen. Her fingers did not stop moving on the keyboard, but she was not reading a single word. She was aware of him moving through the room the way you were aware of weather. A pressure change, the particular quality of silence that preceded something significant. She heard Gareth laugh, the specific laugh he used when he was nervous. And then she heard footsteps pause, and then she heard nothing, and she made the mistake of looking up again. He was looking directly at her. Not the casual, passing-over glance that was all she ever got from the men in this building. He was looking at her the way she looked at financial discrepancies, like he had noticed something that didn't quite fit the expected pattern, and was not yet certain what to do about it. Beatrix held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked back at her screen. Her hands, she noticed, had gone completely still. He left 20 minutes later without speaking to her. She told herself that was fine. She told herself that the fact that she had noticed him at all was simply professional alertness, the same reflex that had once made her flag a suspicious transfer at 11:15 on a Friday night because something hadn't added up. It meant nothing. He was one name in a file. She had 3 more hours of work to get through and a mortgage payment due Thursday. She worked 3 more hours. She went home. She did not sleep particularly well. He came back on Friday. This time he stopped at her desk. He didn't sit. He stood with his coat still on, hands in his pockets, and looked at the spreadsheet on her screen for a moment that lasted approximately 1 year. "You're Beatrix," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," she said, because there was no graceful alternative. "Gareth says you handle the complex restructuring files." Among other things, he was quiet. She was beginning to understand that his silences were not empty. They were functional, the way the pause before a controlled detonation was functional. "I'd like to see the Q2 through Q4 summaries for the Meridian Holdings accounts," he said. "Formant for external review. Monday morning." "I'll need authorization from Gareth," she said, because she did, and because she wanted to see what he would do. He looked at her as if she had said something mildly interesting. "You'll have it within the hour." She had it in 40 minutes. She spent the weekend doing the Meridian Holdings summaries with the particular focus of someone who was simultaneously completing a work task, and also very carefully not thinking about the fact that she was building a clean, presentable version of a document trail that she already knew, in exhaustive detail, was a meticulously constructed fiction. She submitted them Monday at 7:50 a.m. He responded at 8:03, "Thorough, thank you, 2 words." She read them 4 times. She told herself she was assessing the professional register. It started like that. Small requests, always precise, always through official channels that Gareth Sulliwell happily facilitated because Corvin Ashby's business was the kind of business nobody said no to. Beatrix began to understand the shape of what she was doing. She was being assessed. Not romantically. There was nothing of that in the way he spoke to her, nothing that could be called warmth. It was more clinical than that. He was the kind of man who, when he found an asset he hadn't previously accounted for, wanted to understand exactly what it was capable of. She found that she did not entirely mind. She also found that she minded considerably that she did not entirely mind, and spent some time examining that particular contradiction while pretending to review compliance documentation. Beatrix was not a woman who had spent her life waiting to be noticed by powerful men. She had grown up in Sudbury, the oldest of 3, in a household that had been held together largely by her mother's stubbornness and her father's overtime shifts. She had been the scholarship kid at a university full of people whose parents had paid the full fee without looking at the number. She had learned very early that the space between what she was worth and what people initially assumed she was worth was a gap she would have to close herself. And she had closed it, relentlessly, for over a decade, and she had never particularly needed anyone to hand her anything. What she needed right now was to decide what she was going to do about the encrypted drive in her desk drawer, because Corvin Ashby was going to find it. She became certain of this on a Tuesday in November, when he asked her to cross-reference a specific set of account movements against a timeline she recognized. A timeline she had only assembled herself because she had gone looking for it. A timeline that, if he was asking about it, meant either he was checking whether she knew, or he was checking whether she had been careful enough for no one to know. She cross-referenced it. She handed him a clean, accurate, completely incomplete summary that answered the question he had technically asked while revealing nothing of what she actually knew. He read it in her presence. The silence afterward was different from his usual silences. "You're very good at this," he said. "I've had practice," she said. He looked up from the paper. "At what specifically?" "Seeing what's there," she said, "and understanding which parts of it are mine to speak about." He was still for a moment that she felt in her back teeth. Then, "Have dinner with me." It was not a question. It was also not a command. It was something in between, the way all of his communications existed in the space between an instruction and an invitation, leaving her technically free to decline while making the cost of declining quite clear. "Why?" she said. "Because you're the most interesting person in this building," he said, "and because I'd like to continue this conversation somewhere that isn't an open-plan office." She went to dinner. She told herself it was strategic. She told herself she was gathering information, the same way she always gathered information, methodically, with the full knowledge that what she learned might eventually require her to make a decision she did not want to make. The restaurant was the kind of place where the menus had no prices and the staff knew his name. He ordered without looking at the menu. She ordered the halibut because it was the thing she actually wanted, and she did not alter her choice based on what he might think of it. And when he noticed that she had ordered decisively and without consultation, something shifted fractionally in his expression. They talked about Vancouver real estate. They talked about a regulatory change she had flagged in a report 3 months ago that had subsequently caused exactly the complications she had predicted. They did not talk about Meridian Holdings. They did not talk about the 17 other entities she had mapped across 18 months of quiet, careful after-hours work. They talked until the restaurant was nearly empty. "You live in the West End," he said when they were outside. "I do," she said. "How do you know that?" "I looked at your file," he said, unapologetically, as though this were a perfectly ordinary thing. "When you started doing my accounts. And did my file tell you anything useful?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. The November air was cold and damp and smelled like the ocean, which was one of the things she had always loved about this city. "It told me considerably less than you have," he said. She went home. She did not sleep for a long time. She also, that night, moved the encrypted drive, not because she had decided what to do with it, but because leaving it in an office she no longer fully controlled felt like an error she could not afford to make. She moved it to her apartment. She backed it up. She encrypted the backup. She sat at her kitchen table at 1:45 in the morning and looked at her laptop screen and thought about Corvin Ashby's face when she had said understanding which parts of it are mine to speak about, and the way the silence afterward had felt like the moment before a very important contract was signed. She thought about the fact that she was, by every reasonable measure, in an extraordinarily dangerous position, and that she had gotten there not through naivety or carelessness, but through being too good at her job in a room full of people who had assumed she wasn't paying attention. She thought about the halibut, which had been excellent. She went to sleep. November became December. The requests continued. Dinner became twice a week, then 3 times, and somewhere in the accumulation of those evenings, over food she actually enjoyed, in conversations that did not require her to perform smallness, Beatrix became aware that something had shifted in the architecture of her daily life, and that the shift was not entirely professional in nature. He brought her coffee once to her desk. Once, a specific order from a specific place on Granville that she had mentioned in passing 3 weeks earlier. He set it down without commentary and walked away, and she stared at it for a full 30 seconds before opening the lid to confirm that yes, it was exactly right. And then she sat with that information the way she sat with financial discrepancies, patiently until the full meaning of it became clear. She did not make it mean something it wasn't. She was very careful about that, but she also did not pretend she didn't know what it felt like to have someone pay that particular kind of attention. The break-in happened on a Wednesday. She had stayed late, which was not unusual. The office had emptied by 7, and she had been alone with the east-facing windows and the city lights, and a compliance audit she wanted to get through before morning when she heard the elevator. It was not unusual for people to return for forgotten items. What was unusual was that the person who stepped off the elevator looked directly at her desk before looking anywhere else, and was carrying nothing and did not work for Sullywell Capital. She recognized him. Not personally, from a photograph she had found 18 months ago in the course of her documentation. He was one of 3 individuals who appeared in the same offshore records as Corvin Ashby, with a different function. A man whose function in the particular ecosystem she had mapped was the management of problems. She picked up her phone. She did not call the police. She called the only number she had for Corvin Ashby, which she had told herself she was keeping for professional emergencies, which this was, technically. He answered on the second ring. She said, "There's a man in my office who I believe is here because of the work I've been doing on your accounts. I need you to tell me whether I should be concerned." There was a silence. "Where are you right now?" he said, and his voice was different, stripped of the measured quality she had become accustomed to, flat and immediate, in a way that communicated, without ambiguity, that he was already in motion. "Still at my desk," she said. "Don't move," he said. "Lock your screen. Keep your phone on." "I'd like to note," she said, "that I have a significant amount of documentation that is not currently in this building. Precautions." Another silence. This one had a different texture. "Of course you have," he said, not angry, something she could not immediately name. He arrived in 14 minutes. She knew this because she had been watching the clock with the focused attention of a woman who dealt in precision, and also because the man who had come off the elevator had spent 11 of those minutes in Gareth Sullywell's office, and the remaining 3 apparently reconsidering his options, because when Corvin walked through the door, the other man was already on his way to the stairwell. She did not ask what happened in the stairwell. She made a decision not to ask. Corvin crossed the floor to her desk and stood looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, something stripped of its usual composure, something that had the quality of a man recalculating. "You've known," he said. "How long?" It wasn't a question, it was an accounting. 18 months, she said. He absorbed this. His jaw was very tight, and you didn't, he started. "No," she said, "I didn't." "Why?" She looked at him. She had been asking herself this question for 18 months, and she had multiple answers, none of them fully satisfying, one of them true. "Because I wasn't certain what the right thing to do was," she said, "and I don't act on incomplete conclusions." He was looking at her with an intensity that she felt very specifically in her sternum. "That is either the most professional answer I have ever heard," he said, "or the most honest." "It's both," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Come home with me." She looked at him. "Not." He stopped. Something moved through his expression that was, she thought, the closest thing to uncertainty she had ever seen on his face. "I mean, you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be alone tonight. That's what I mean." "Is it?" she said. Beatrix, I need you to understand something, she said, and she was not moving from her chair, because she was not a woman who was moved from positions she had chosen. I am not a problem to be managed. I'm not a variable you need to contain. If that's what tonight is, it isn't, he said. I know what you are. Tell me, she said, because she had been waiting for 4 years of invisibility, and longer than that if she was honest. For someone in a room like this to say it correctly, he was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to. Then, you're the person who has known the full picture of what I am for 18 months, made no move to use it, and just called me when you were in danger, instead of calling someone who would have used it against you. You are the most trustworthy person I have ever encountered in any professional context, and I've been sitting across from you at dinner 3 times a week for 6 weeks, trying to figure out how to tell you that, and making an extremely poor job of it. The office was very quiet. That was better than I expected, she said. I've been practicing, he said, and the thing that happened to his face when he said it was something she was completely unprepared for, because it was the first time she had seen him look like he was not in complete control of an outcome, and it was, she discovered, the most appealing thing about him by a significant margin. She went home with him. Not because she was afraid, and not because he had told her to, because she had been making careful, thoroughly considered decisions for her entire adult life, and this one, she found, did not feel careful or considered at all. It felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, like the truth. His place was in Coal Harbour, which she had expected, the entire wall facing the inlet made of glass. The city was spread out below them in the dark, and the water was black and lit by the bridge lights, and Beatrix stood at the window in her work blazer and her practical shoes and thought about the encrypted drive in her apartment and the 18 months of documentation and the fact that she was standing in the home of the man at the center of it, and felt not afraid but something more complicated and considerably more inconvenient. She turned around. He was watching her. I need to know, she said. What happens to the documentation? Nothing, he said. It's yours, or that's not how this usually works. No, he said. It isn't. You're not worried. I'm many things right now, he said. Worried is not one of them. She looked at him for a long moment. Why, she said. Because you've had 18 months to do something with it, he said. And what you chose to do instead was your job, extremely well, right up until someone came through my organization who didn't know what you were and made an error in judgment. Which I will be addressing. And now I'd like you to stay, he said. Tonight, beyond tonight. However you need to structure that to make sense to you, structure it however you need, but I would like you to stay. She was quiet. She was thinking. She was thinking about 4 years of lunch at her desk. She was thinking about her mother's funeral and the 7 a.m. phone call and the flowers that never came. She was thinking about the coffee, exactly right, left on her desk without commentary. She was thinking about his voice on the phone 14 minutes ago, already in motion before the sentence was finished. I'm going to need, she said, to renegotiate my contract. Something happened in his face that she would spend considerable time afterward trying to describe accurately to herself, and the closest she ever got was relief. The particular relief of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and has just been told he can set it down. Name your terms, he said. I'll have them to you by Monday, she said. Of course you will, he said. She stayed. The documentation never went anywhere, not because he had taken it, and not because she had destroyed it. She kept it on a drive that eventually moved from her kitchen table to the second drawer of a desk in an office with a Coal Harbour view, in a building that bore no signs and employed no one she had known before that Wednesday in October, doing work that was considerably more complex than anything she had ever done at Sullywell Capital, and considerably better compensated. Gareth Sullywell had called when she gave her notice. She had been professional. She had given 2 weeks. She had trained her replacement with characteristic thoroughness and said nothing about anything she was not required to say. On her last day, no one sent flowers. On her first day somewhere else, a coffee appeared on her new desk at 8:02 a.m. The same order, from the same place on Granville, and Corvin Ashby walked past without commentary, because that was how he operated, and she understood by now that this was how he said things he did not have the vocabulary for yet, and she opened the lid to confirm it was exactly right. It was. She got to work.